Scarlett Monroe walked quickly, as if the ground behind her were on fire. The cold morning wind lashed her flushed cheeks, and the gray sky gave the city of Ravenwood an air of abandonment. At 19, Scarlett carried more on her shoulders than the weight of unemployment and poverty. She carried the burden of an untouched dream in a broken world. She dreamed of marrying as a virgin, just like she'd heard in so many sermons with her mother, and of living a pure, whole, and true love. As she crossed the run-down neighborhood on her way to the noble side of the city, where mansions slept silently by the lake, her footsteps echoed with urgency and hope. In her worn-out bag, she carried a resume printed at the public library. In her eyes she carried faith. In her mind, her asthmatic mother's treatment, worsening by the day. Her destination that morning was a job interview for a cleaning position in an elite mansion. It wasn't what she had dreamed of, but it was what hunger demanded. If you love stories that touch the heart, hit subscribe now. Your support helps bring truly unforgettable stories to life. On Holloway Street, among torn bags and overturned cans, a faint sound made her stop. It was crying. Not ordinary crying, but a whimper that seemed to fade with the wind. Scarlett looked around, heart racing, and saw a bundle next to the dumpster. Hesitant, she approached. As she pulled away the dirty cloths, shock paralyzed her. A baby. Fragile, trembling, its little face red from the cold, its half-closed eyes as if the light was too much to bear. Scarlett fell to her knees. Time stopped. Her trembling hands wrapped it in her own coat. Instinct spoke louder than fear. That baby was real, breathing with difficulty. Its chest rose and fell as if it were fighting off death. Scarlett looked around. No one. Nothing. Not a soul. She knew if she left him there, he would die. So she did what only the brave would do. She took him in her arms and kept walking, now with a life in her hands. On the crowded bus, the stairs were like blades. A poor teenage girl in old clothes, holding a newborn in her arms. A woman muttered, "Another irresponsible girl." A man asked if the baby was hers. Scarlett only looked down at the child and gave a sad smile. She had no answers. Her heart ached. Each stop was a test of her emotional strength. The baby slept, warmed by her body heat. She felt that moment would change everything but didn't know how. When she reached the wealthy district, the contrast between luxury and her own misery was brutal. Perfectly trimmed hedges, automatic gates, leafless gardens. Scarlett stood in front of the mansion where the interview would take place. The hand holding the baby trembled. She rang the bell and took a deep breath. A new world was about to open, or cruelly shut in her face. The door was opened by a woman with a cold expression. She looked at Scarlett with disdain and at the baby with suspicion. Before she could say anything, a male voice came from the stairs inside. It was Ethan Carter. Tall, impeccable posture, tired and cold eyes. Scarlett felt small before him. But something in his gaze changed when he saw the girl with a baby in her arms. He descended slowly, as if drawn by something he didn't understand. He stopped in front of her. Silence. Scarlett held the baby as if holding the last piece of dignity. Ethan seemed like he wanted to say something, but only asked, "What's his name?" Scarlett swallowed hard. I don't know. I just found him. He was in the trash. The sentence fell like a bomb. A powerful silence filled the room. Ethan said nothing. He just stared at the baby, then at Scarlett's face. There was something in that scene that disarmed him. He, who had been betrayed by a fiancé, abandoned by friends, used by gold diggers, and shaped by the coldness of business, now felt something he hadn't felt in years. Compassion. Maybe it was a protective instinct. Maybe it was the mirror of pain he recognized in the girl's eyes. He ordered them to be taken to the library. The housekeeper protested but was silenced with a look. Scarlett walked through the luxurious hallway holding the baby tightly. In her heart was fear, but also a timid, fragile hope, like a matchstick about to burn out. In the library, surrounded by leather-bound books and large windows, she sat with the baby in her lap. Ethan stood before her. "Tell me everything. From the beginning," he said. And there, in that silence filled with promises and wounds, began a story that would forever change 3 destinies. Hers, his, and that of a rejected baby who found love where no one expected. Scarlett sat slowly in the velvet armchair, her eyes still carrying a fear she barely knew how to name. The baby, wrapped in her thick coat, now slept more peacefully, his little face softened by the mansion's warm temperature. The only sounds were the ticking of the wall clock and Ethan Carter's heavy breathing as he observed every move she made. His gaze analytical but growing less distant. Scarlett began to speak. Her voice was firm, even as it trembled. She told how she heard the crying, how she found the child in the trash, how she couldn't leave him there and decided to bring him, even without knowing what it would mean for her life. Ethan listened in silence, arms crossed, jaw slightly clenched, as if fighting back a flood of thoughts. She also spoke of her sick mother, her desperate search for a job, and how this interview was her last hope before bills swallowed up the last of her dignity. There was no self-pity in her voice, only truth. Ethan's eyes scanned her as if searching for lies, manipulation, hidden motives. But all he saw was a skinny girl with deep circles under her eyes and a rare kind of courage, the kind only those with nothing left to lose can carry. He, who had been surrounded by sophisticated women, full of makeup and secrets, had never seen such transparency in a pair of eyes. The image of Scarlett kneeling by a dumpster with a baby in her arms replayed in his mind like a photograph refusing to fade. Why didn't she take the baby to the authorities? Why risk everything, carry a stranger's child, miss an interview? These questions echoed in his mind, but the answer was clear. She had love in her. A love he hadn't known how to recognize for years. Something moved in him. It wasn't physical attraction. It wasn't pity. It was admiration. And for someone as hardened as Ethan, admiration was a breakthrough. The housekeeper knocked lightly and said the interview papers were ready. Ethan raised a hand, dismissing her with a sharp gesture. He walked to the fireplace, hands in his pockets, and took a deep breath. When he turned to Scarlett, his eyes had softened. He said she wouldn't just be interviewed, she would be hired immediately. His tone was direct, authoritative, but there was a touch of humanity in every syllable. Scarlett's eyes widened in surprise. She tried to thank him, but he cut her off. He said the condition was simple. She would live in the mansion, receive a decent salary, food, and assistance for her mother. But there was more. He wanted to help legalize the baby's situation, adopt him formally. But for that, they needed a convincing story for society, something no one would question. That's when Ethan, with a tense look, proposed the arrangement. Scarlett wouldn't be just an employee. To the outside world, she would be his fiancée. At first, it was just strategy. Protect the company's image, avoid scandals, and allow the adoption to move faster. Once the baby was linked to the Carter name, he would automatically have legal and medical security. Scarlett stepped back, frightened. The proposal sounded absurd, surreal, even dangerous. But when she looked at the sleeping baby, so fragile, so helpless, she knew she had no choice. This wasn't about her. It was about giving that child a chance at life. Ethan assured her she would be safe, that everything would be strictly professional, that she would have time to think. But inside, even he didn't know if he could stay in control. There was something about Scarlett that drew him in more than he wanted to admit. In the following days, Scarlett was settled into a comfortable room in the east wing of the mansion. Her mother was brought in as well and began living there too, in a smaller room near the winter garden. The baby received medical care, special nutrition, and soon his little face gained color. His eyes opened more often, and a faint smile began to appear. Scarlett named him Jason, a name she had read in a book about redemption. Ethan didn't comment, but he smiled when he heard the name for the first time. Gradually, a routine took hold. Scarlett cleaned the rooms with discretion, cared for Jason with a mother's love, and at the same time, learned the ways of the elite. She wore modest but now new clothes, walked upright with poise, but her gaze remained the same, innocent and determined. And Ethan, even while keeping his distance, began to observe her from afar with unsettling frequency. Ethan started taking Scarlett to business dinners, discreet introductions, and social events, always hand in hand like a happy couple. Scarlett played the role, but her heart raced at every touch, every exchanged smile, every shared silence in the car on the way back. Over time, they began to uncover wounds neither had ever shared with anyone. Scarlett learned about Ethan's betrayal, the cancelled wedding, the public shame. Ethan discovered that she had never been with a man, that she had dreamed of marriage since childhood, and that even in the face of poverty, she still held on to hope in God and in love. It was as if, behind the lie of their engagement, a deeper truth had begun to grow. Silent, slow, but inevitable. In the days that followed, a strange synchronicity began to take shape inside the Carter mansion. Scarlett, without even realizing it, became part of the environment. Her presence was no longer seen as foreign by the staff, the security, or even the occasional high society visitors. When she walked the halls with Jason in her arms, it was as if a new air spread through the cold rooms of the estate. A warm air, alive, full of humanity. Ethan, still bound to the image of the serious and unreachable executive, found himself noticing things that had never mattered to him before. How she put the baby to sleep with a soft lullaby. How she smiled at the gardeners when no one was watching. How she blushed when complimented, even on something small. He, who had avoided love so many times out of fear, now feared it might be too late to avoid it again. There was something in her that slipped past his highest walls. One evening, a business dinner gathered important investors at the mansion. Scarlett was by his side, dressed in a simple but elegant gown chosen by an image consultant hired by Ethan. Her hair was tied in a delicate bun, light makeup highlighting the purity of her eyes. She looked like a lost princess in a castle of concrete and steel. During the dinner, while everyone spoke of numbers, contracts, and power, Scarlett remained silent, until a gray-haired lady asked how she had met Ethan. Scarlett froze. Ethan took her hand under the table and answered for her. It was by chance. Or perhaps fate. The phrase made the entire table smile, and the woman remarked how well they suited each other. Scarlett blushed but held her rehearsed smile. Deep down, the lie of the engagement was starting to hurt, not because it was false, but because her heart no longer knew how to separate performance from real desire. That same night, as Scarlett was changing Jason for bed, Ethan appeared at the bedroom door, leaning against the frame, watching in silence. She didn't see him right away, but when she turned and their eyes met, there was a moment of unease between them. Ethan stepped closer, took Jason in his arms, and stood there for a few minutes, rocking him with firmness but tenderness. It was the first time Scarlett saw him so vulnerable, so human. He looks like you, Ethan said, looking down at the baby. Scarlett smiled. He's not mine, but it feels like he was born for me. Ethan didn't respond. He just laid Jason back in the crib, kissed his forehead lightly, and left the room without another word. But that night, as he lay alone in his vast, silent bed, he couldn't sleep. The image of Scarlett with Jason in her arms invaded his thoughts like a scent that refuses to fade. Days turned into weeks, and the engagement charade continued. Photos began circulating on local social media columns, speculation about the couple arose, and pressure from Ethan's family, especially his mother, began to build. Lady Carter, a controlling woman, had always wanted her son to marry someone from the elite, a known name raised among jewels and trips to Europe. When she met Scarlett, even under the role of fiancé, she immediately sensed the scent of the commoner. She tolerated her presence only for appearances, but she was suspicious. One morning, as Scarlett was having breakfast with Jason in the winter garden, Lady Carter approached and, with a cold smile, said, "You might fool my son's eyes, girl, but you don't fool mine. I know who you are." Scarlett remained calm. She took a deep breath and replied, "And who am I, ma'am?" The woman turned and walked away without answering. But Scarlett knew. That lie had an expiration date. Jason grew more each day, and with him, the bond between the three of them. Ethan could no longer hide the affection he felt for the child. He spent most of his time at home, something that had never happened before. He canceled meetings to see the baby laugh, allowed himself to be photographed with Scarlett in the gardens, helped assemble toys, held the boy in his arms during dinner. To the press, he was the man who had finally surrendered to love and family. But behind the scenes, Scarlett began to feel a knot inside her. The lie was becoming truth, but she was still the same virgin, dreamer, frightened young woman. She felt guilty for desiring Ethan. She felt guilty for loving that baby as if she had given birth to him. She felt out of place, like a foreign piece on a board where she had not been invited to play. And still, her heart beat faster every time Ethan walked into the room, every time he said her name. On a rainy late afternoon, Scarlett was sitting on the mansion's deck, staring at the gray, silent lake. Jason was asleep in the stroller beside her. Ethan appeared with 2 coffees in hand and sat beside her in silence. For a few minutes, only the sound of the rain and the smell of wet wood surrounded them. "Are you happy here?" he asked, looking straight ahead, not at her. Scarlett took a while to answer. "I'm grateful. And scared." Ethan looked at her. "Scared of me?" She shook her head. "Of everything. Of what I'm feeling. Of what's fake. And what might not be." Ethan leaned in slightly, hesitating, and said in a low voice, "So am I very much." And for the first time, a silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was comforting. Pause that said more than any word. What had started as a deal was now threatening to become something real. But the world outside wasn't ready to let that truth blossom without consequences. If this story is touching you in any way, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications. Here, every story is a real emotional journey, made for you to feel, surrender, and be surprised. The morning after that silent moment on the deck, Scarlett woke up with a new feeling in her chest. Jason was still sleeping peacefully, and the soft sunlight filtered through the white curtains, as if the outside world had surrendered to the peace of that moment. But peace was a temporary luxury for those who carry secrets. When she came down for breakfast, she found the housekeeper with a pale face, holding a tablet. The frozen image on the screen chilled Scarlett's blood. It was her dressed as a maid, holding a bucket of laundry on the mansion's side porch. The caption read, "Mr. Carter's perfect bride." Or just another lucky employee. It was a photo taken by a hidden paparazzo. The truth, until then smothered, had begun to leak like poison through the cracks of their charade. Scarlett jumped up and ran to Ethan's office, heart racing, breath short. He was already on the phone, dealing with advisors, trying to contain the crisis. Ethan hung up and ran a hand through his hair, clearly irritated, but not surprised. "I knew this would happen sooner or later," he said without raising his voice. Scarlett, with tears in her eyes, tried to explain, but he stopped her with a calm gesture. "It wasn't your fault. It's mine. I'm the one who brought you into this world without preparing you. I'm the one who made up this lie. Now we have to decide. Do we keep going or end this?" Scarlett looked at Jason, sleeping peacefully in the portable crib beside them. "If we end this now, what happens to him?" Ethan sighed. "He's still my son. Legally, most of it is already approved. But if you leave, everything we built together will collapse. And I don't know if I want you to go." The words hung in the air like a veiled confession. For the first time, he let it slip that she meant more to him than a role in a convenient act. The news of the supposed fake engagement exploded in the media. Gossip shows, columnists, bloggers. Everyone wanted to know. Who was Scarlett Monroe? Where did she come from? Why didn't anyone know her family? Why were there no records of her in social circles? Social media split in two. Some defended her as a regular woman living a modern fairy tale. Others accused her of being a gold digger, an opportunist, a scammer. Scarlett avoided leaving her room. She spent her days reading, praying silently, and caring for Jason with even more devotion. Ethan in turn faced the board, his parents, the lawyers, defending her with a firmness no one expected. When his father pulled him aside and threatened to remove him from the presidency if he continued with the commoner farce, Ethan responded with a look old Mr. Carter would never forget. "She's more honest than anyone in this room. More than any of you have ever been. And that is priceless." But the pressure kept growing. One of the major shareholders, a ruthless and ambitious woman named Victoria Ellis, began manipulating the press to sabotage Scarlett. She hired a private investigator to dig into the girl's past, looking for any scandal, any stain, any mistake. She wanted to destroy her, and by doing so, force Ethan back to the path the investors expected, a marriage of convenience to some European banker's daughter. Scarlett knew none of this. She still believed everything would be resolved with time, with patience, with truth. But the invisible war had already begun. And then came the final blow. On a rainy afternoon, as Scarlett walked with Jason in the garden, a black car pulled up in front of the main gate. A woman stepped out, looking worn out, with disheveled hair and simple clothes. She walked shakily toward the entrance and said she was the baby's mother, and she wanted her son back. The revelation hit Scarlett like a nuclear bomb. Ethan, in disbelief, demanded tests, documents, proof. The woman, named Mabel, claimed she had been forced to abandon the baby by an abusive boyfriend who was now in prison. She cried, begged, said she was sorry, that she had spent weeks searching for her child. The media, always sniffing out scandal, were already stationed outside the mansion. Scarlett panicked. She stayed up all night, holding Jason in her arms, afraid they would take him. Ethan, though skeptical, respected the legal process. DNA tests were ordered urgently. Scarlett, in silence, braced for the worst. She knew that legally she could lose him. But in her heart, Jason was already her son. She developed a fever, couldn't eat, couldn't breathe properly. The emotional pressure, combined with exhaustion, began taking a toll. Ethan cared for her, tried to feed her, held her hand, but she no longer responded the same way. She was breaking inside. 2 days later, the test results arrived. The woman was indeed the biological mother. The news was delivered by a lawyer with a heavy expression. Scarlett cried in silence. Ethan slammed the door in anger and drove off aimlessly. The pain was unbearable. Jason would be returned to the woman who had left him in the trash. Scarlett didn't argue, didn't beg. She simply said goodbye with a long kiss, pressing his little face against her chest. When the social worker carried him away, Scarlett fell to her knees, soundless, strengthless. Ethan returned hours later and found her on the bedroom floor, clinging to a pillow, eyes open but empty. He sat beside her, held her tightly, and promised, "I'll fight for you. For him. For us." But she didn't answer. Her pain was silent. And sometimes the loudest screams are the ones no one hears. Scarlett no longer cried. There were no tears left. Only a void, a dry, deep, silent hole inside her. She remained on the cold floor of the room, eyes open, staring at the ceiling like someone who no longer expects anything from life. Jason had been taken. The woman who threw him in the trash now held him as if she were his mother. And she, who gave the baby warmth, love, a name, milk, life, was there, invisible, irrelevant, voiceless and powerless. Ethan tried talking to her, tried feeding her, called her name, but Scarlett seemed distant, as if she had returned to an old place she'd sworn never to go back to. The place of abandonment, of silent pain, of absolute solitude. And the house, once filled with light and life just weeks before, now returned to what it had always been. A marble tomb, a place of loveless luxury and broken promises. In the days that followed, Ethan became reclusive. He cancelled meetings, locked himself in the office, argued with lawyers, shouted at his staff. There was rage in his voice, but also guilt. For the first time, he felt powerless in the world he had always manipulated with ease. He tried pulling strings, finding legal loopholes, searching for inconsistencies in the story of the woman who claimed Jason. He hired a private detective to investigate Mabel's past. He needed something, anything that would allow him to reopen the case. Scarlett didn't react. She still got up at the same time each day, bathed, combed her hair, dressed in plain clothes. But her eyes were dead. Her mother, increasingly worried, begged her to come home, to leave that place that now felt more like an emotional prison. But Scarlett refused. She needed to stay. Because even without Jason, there was still a piece of him there. The sheets he used, the crib, the toys, the silence of the room. One night, Scarlett woke from a nightmare. She was sweating, breathing heavily, and the image of the baby being ripped from her arms played over and over like a punishment. When she turned on the light, she saw Ethan sitting in the armchair, just like so many other nights. He had been watching her. He hadn't slept. He looked thinner, his eyes red, his beard unkempt. He approached and knelt before her. "I promised I'd take care of you both." Failed. Scarlett, for the first time in days, lifted her eyes. There was a new light in them, not of anger but of acceptance. She touched his face with the palm of her hand. "You tried. And that was more than any man ever did for me." Ethan held her hand, kissed it gently, reverently, like someone holding a miracle that's slipping away. It was there, in that silent dawn, that something between them changed for good. For the first time there was no mask, no contract, no performance. Just shared pain. And a love that, without asking permission, had begun to bloom amid the wreckage. The next morning Scarlett ate again. She asked to see old photos of Jason. She spent hours with Ethan, reminiscing, laughing at simple things, crying in silence. Slowly, the flame began to rekindle. Inspired by that spark, Ethan took a phone call that brought him to full attention. The private investigator, after a deep investigation, had discovered that Mabel, Jason's biological mother, had lied. She hadn't lost custody merely due to poverty or domestic abuse. She had been investigated for involvement in drug trafficking years earlier. She was on parole. The imprisoned boyfriend was a gang leader, and Jason had likely been discarded to protect her during an investigation. The bomb had exploded. Now, with documented evidence, Ethan could contest the adoption and reopen the case. But there was a risk: the media. If made public, Jason would be dragged into the center of a legal war, forever stained. He had to act wisely and fast. That same night, Ethan took Scarlett to the lake. It was the same deck where, weeks earlier, she had confessed her fears. The sky was clear, and the stars' reflection made it seem the world, for a moment, was more beautiful than it really was. He held her hands and told her everything, that there was evidence against Mabel, that the case would be reopened, that Jason could come home, but that for it to work, they had to fully embrace the role of parents. Not in a performance. In real life. He got down on one knee. Not with a ring, not with a rehearsed speech, but with truth in his eyes. I don't want to protect you as part of a deal anymore. I want to love you as a woman. And I want you to be his mother. Legally. Forever. Scarlett cried. For the first time, good tears. Tears that healed. And in that moment, everything inside her said yes. She didn't answer with words. She simply threw herself into his arms, and there they stayed under the stars, sealing a love that was born in the trash, but bloomed in the impossible. 2 weeks later, in absolute secrecy, the judge reversed the previous adoption. Full custody of Jason was granted to Ethan and Scarlett. The condition: secrecy, emotional stability, and the presentation of a solid family unit. Ethan met every requirement with precision. Scarlett began signing officially as Monroe Carter, and Jason finally came home. When she held him in her arms again, the whole house seemed to breathe. The walls filled with sound, warmth, and love. Jason smiled. Scarlett cried. Ethan couldn't hold back his emotion. There was the family no one expected, built from broken pieces, pain and shame. But true, real, and unbreakable. The lie was over. Now it was all real. And destiny, at last, smiled upon those who dared to believe, even when everything seemed lost. The days that followed passed like a dream. The Carter house was no longer just a mansion with white columns and grand staircases. It was a home. Jason ran through the hallways with laughter that echoed like music. Scarlett learned to smile with her whole body. And Ethan, once stern and solitary, seemed like a different man. Lighter, more human. All the staff noticed the change. The house chef began preparing Scarlett's favorite meals. The flowers in the garden were replaced with species that reminded her of her childhood home. It was as if everything, even the walls, was rearranging itself to receive her. But she still carried a silence within. A dream she kept hidden. The dream of walking down the aisle in white, loved by someone who looked at her with truth. And even though everything was perfect, that was still missing. She would never ask. But Ethan knew. The afternoon he received news that the judge had signed the final adoption document, Ethan disappeared for a few hours. No one knew where he was. Scarlett found it odd but didn't ask. When he returned, he was nervous, sweating, holding a small package. He asked for Jason to stay with his grandmother for the night. Said he wanted to do something special. That evening, he took Scarlett to the same deck by the lake. That place was now theirs. A natural altar. It was lit with small lights hanging from the branches. White petals covered the ground. A full moon lit the sky. And in silence, Scarlett understood everything. He knelt. But this time with a simple gold ring and tears in his eyes. Scarlett Monroe, you saved my son. You saved me. And now I want to save your dreams. Will you marry me? She said yes before he even finished the sentence. And in that moment time stopped. For both of them. Forever. The wedding was set for 30 days later. Simple but carefully planned. Scarlett refused extravagant parties, endless guest lists, and purposeless luxury. She wanted something intimate, real. The guests were few. Her mother, some house staff, close friends of Ethan's, the judge who signed the adoption, and the pastor from the small church Scarlett attended with her mother as a child. The dress was custom-made, white like her dreams, with lace hand-stitched by a neighborhood lady. Jason carried the rings, wearing a tiny suit and a big smile. And when Scarlett entered the chapel, everyone was moved. But no one more than Ethan. He cried like a man who had lost everything, and now was gaining more than he'd ever dreamed. The ceremony was brief, delicate, with simple vows. But every word was loaded with truth. When they kissed, there was no doubt. This was real. Two survivors. Two whole hearts. Finally one. The reception was held in the mansion's garden, but without ostentation. Wooden tables, lit candles, soft music. Scarlett danced with Jason in her arms, spinning like a little girl. Her mother cried the entire time silently, as if she couldn't believe that the daughter who once thought of giving up on life was now a wife and mother, loved and respected. Ethan watched everything from a distance, his eyes shining. When night finally fell, he led Scarlett inside the house. They climbed the stairs slowly, as if wanting to stretch each second. In the bedroom, petals on the bed, dim lighting and a reverent silence. Scarlett trembled. She had never given herself before. Always said she would wait for true love. And there he was in front of her. Patient, tender, respectful. Ethan held her hands and kissed her forehead. "I'll wait. As long as it takes." But she didn't want to wait anymore. That night, Scarlett was touched with respect and tenderness. Every gesture from Ethan was a whisper of care. No rush, no intrusion. It was love revealing itself through soft touches, lingering looks, whispered words. She cried during the act, not from pain but from release. It was as if every part of her said, "Finally," and Ethan understood. He dried her tears with his lips and swore never to let her feel anything less than precious. They slept wrapped in each other like two pieces that finally fit. In the morning, she woke with sunlight streaming through the curtains and his arm around her waist. She smiled. She was married. She was loved. She was a mother. She was happy. All of this without ever needing to sell herself, beg, or lower her worth. She remained pure. Not in body that is fleeting but in soul. And that's what Ethan loved in her. In the days that followed, Scarlett returned to life with new brightness. She cared for the house, for Jason, and started small social projects for other women from the neighborhood where she grew up. Ethan supported everything. There was a new purpose in him. Together, they became a symbol of resilience. The tabloids, which once judged them, now praised their love story. But they didn't care about headlines. They lived for their son, for their home, and for the little things. A sunny afternoon, a child's drawing, a kiss in the kitchen. Scarlett looked back and saw how far she had come. From the gutter to the altar. From abandonment to fulfillment. And she understood. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't come with angels or thunder. They come disguised as abandoned babies. And they teach us that true love doesn't seek perfection. It recognizes truth and values it like gold. Jason was growing fast. And with him so did the responsibilities. Scarlett was now seen by society as a respectable lady, involved in social causes, elegant and featured in columns. But at her core, she was still the same girl who once walked the streets of Ravenwood with a baby wrapped in her own coat. That never changed. Yet fame brought a more cruel kind of judgment. From wealthy women who never understood her simplicity, and from powerful men who were disturbed by the firm and modest stance of a woman who refused to sell herself for power. Once, at a charity meeting, a socialite whispered too loudly, "She went from the streets to the suite. A miracle. Or a scam." Scarlett heard it. Didn't respond. But it hurt. When Ethan found out, he wanted to confront everyone. But she stopped him. "I know who I am. And so do you. That's enough." He held her like one holds the rarest of diamonds. Because that's exactly what she was. Jason, now 5 years old, was beginning to understand the world around him. A world where he was loved at home, but judged for having been found in the trash. Kids at school whispered, repeating things they'd heard from their parents. "Trash baby. Dumpster boy." And although he was strong, one day Jason cried. Locked in his room. He asked his mother, "Why was I thrown away?" Scarlett hugged him but didn't know how to answer. That was a wound no kiss could heal. Ethan tried to explain, but Jason didn't want words. He wanted meaning. He wanted to understand why someone would discard him as if he were nothing. Jason's pain made Scarlett feel the world collapse again. That night, she prayed like she hadn't in a long time. On her knees in silence, she asked God for wisdom. The next day, she took Jason to the dumpster where she had found him. They sat together there. And she said, "This is where your story began." But it was never where it ended. Jason looked into her eyes. And understood. From that day on, Jason started telling his story with pride. Scarlett taught him there was no shame in surviving. Ethan reinforced that true heirs are not defined by blood, but by the love they carry in their hearts. But the media didn't see it that way. An old report about Jason's abandonment resurfaced. Sensational headlines. Pictures of the dumpster. Speculations about the biological mother. Everything came back like an avalanche. Scarlett remained silent, while Ethan struggled to process the rage. The world wanted to know, who was the woman who threw Jason away? The case, now reopened by the court, brought up the name of a young woman who had disappeared from the city shortly after the abandonment. She was a former nanny, with a history of depression. A reporter found her in a remote community. And the story took a new turn. The reunion was inevitable, but not as everyone expected. The woman, Emily Watkins, was fragile, living in a small house far from everything. Upon seeing Jason again, she didn't ask for forgiveness. She just cried. She said she had been abused by her employer, who, after getting her pregnant, threatened her if she didn't get rid of the problem. She said she abandoned the baby out of desperation, out of fear. Scarlett listened in silence. And although everything inside her wanted to scream, she didn't judge. Jason, with the kind of premature maturity only pain can teach, looked at Emily and said, "You gave me life. But the one who taught me how to live was her." He pointed to Scarlett. And in that moment the cycle closed. Scarlett extended her hand to Emily. Said she forgave her. Not for Emily, but for Jason. Ethan, emotional, embraced them both. and the boy once again felt whole. The old wound hadn't disappeared, but now it had been treated, and it no longer hurt like before. Because where there had once been trauma, now there was understanding. Months passed. Scarlett continued helping women in vulnerable situations. She created a project that welcomed single mothers. Emily was one of the first to be hired as a caregiver. The story moved the city. Companies began to fund the project. And so, from pain, healing was born. Jason grew, now more confident, stronger. Ethan was invited to speak about adoptive fatherhood and leadership with empathy. Everything seemed to be falling into place. But then a letter arrived, breaking the routine. A former shareholder of Ethan's family company was challenging Jason's inheritance in court, claiming that a trash boy could not be heir to a multinational. The case made headlines. Once again, Scarlett found herself in the middle of a storm. But this time she was stronger and prepared. Ethan vowed, "They don't know who they're dealing with." And for the first time, Scarlett replied, "They're about to find out." In a live interview on one of the country's biggest TV shows, Scarlett was invited to share her story. It was her chance to show the world who she was. And she went, with class, serenity, and truth. She told how she found Jason, how she ended up in the mansion, how her love for Ethan was born, and how her greatest pride was having remained loyal to her principles. The host, moved, asked, "And if all of this is taken from you someday?" Scarlett answered, "I was born with nothing, so nothing scares me, because what was given to me I'm grateful for. But what I am, no one can take that away." The quote went viral. Millions of views. Thousands of new supporters. The judge in the case watched the interview. Days later, he ruled in Jason's favor and declared officially that love is a valid criterion for the inheritance of any legacy. And so Jason became an heir, not just to the fortune, but to the honor, to the love, and to a story impossible to forget. Time passed like a breath. Jason was now 18, tall with steady eyes and an easy smile. He carried a serenity few young men had. Scarlett, now nearing 40, still had sweetness in her eyes and strength in her heart. Ethan, more mature and serene, was a proud father and a man deeply in love with his family. The Carter mansion was no longer the same, not because of the luxury, but because now it was a home. That once silent, cold, and oppressive house now echoed with laughter, heated political discussions, long family game nights, and lazy pancake mornings with strong coffee. Scarlett continued her mission with abandoned mothers. Jason, in turn, excelled in his studies. He earned a full scholarship to study law. He wanted to fight for those who, like him, were once discarded. Ethan, emotional, offered him a job in the company. But Jason declined. He said, "Not yet. First, I want to fight for the laws that gave me the right to be here." Ethan smiled and understood. At his high school graduation, Jason gave a speech. He didn't read it. He spoke from the heart, and every word felt etched in fire. "They told me I was trash, but I was saved by someone who believed a life is worth more than a judgment. To her I owe everything. To him who took me in, I owe the courage to never hide. And to you young people like me I ask, never let anyone tell you where you can't come from. Came from nothing, But that never stopped me from becoming someone." The audience rose in applause. Scarlett wept. Ethan held her hand. And in that moment everything made sense. Every pain, every sacrifice, every silence. It had all been necessary for that moment to exist. On the way back, Jason stopped in front of the old house where they had lived before the mansion. It was empty, with peeling paint and broken windows. He said, "It was here that I learned to be grateful." Scarlett smiled but said nothing. Because sometimes, silence carries more gratitude than 1,000 words. Even with everything going well, Ethan knew time with his parents was running out. Mr. and Mrs. Carter were already fragile. And one cold morning, his mother didn't wake up. Scarlett held her hand until the very last moment. Jason, kneeling beside the bed, prayed quietly. Ethan cried like a boy. The funeral was discreet, intimate. And during his speech, Ethan said, "My mother didn't accept Scarlett at first. But before she left, she told me, 'She saved you, Ethan. And she saved our name. Take care of her.'" Hurt. But it also brought peace. Days later, Ethan's father passed as well. And once again, Scarlett was the pillar of the family. Jason held his father in his arms for the first time. And said, "Now it's my turn to hold you, Dad." Ethan broke down. And it was there, among tears and embraces, that the Carter family grew even stronger. Because death didn't break the bond. It only elevated it. The company grew. Scarlett became more involved in social initiatives. Jason interned at a prestigious law firm. Everything seemed too calm, until another letter arrived. It was an invitation. Jason had been selected to represent young leaders at a UN conference in Geneva. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. Scarlett celebrated with a simple cake and a handmade sign. "Our son in the world." Ethan bought him a new suitcase, crying in the store. Jason left weeks later. At the airport he hugged them both. And before boarding, whispered, "Everything I am begins with you." Scarlett broke down right there. Ethan held her. And for the first time in many years, she felt like the young woman who once held a baby in her arms and faced the world without knowing what would come. But now she knew the future was good. Because Jason was the result of the impossible. And where there is impossible love, there are possible miracles. Months passed. Jason sent letters, brought good news. But one rainy night something different happened. Scarlett had a nightmare. She dreamed Jason was crying, trapped in a dark place. She woke up startled. Ethan tried to calm her, but the feeling was too strong. They called Jason. No answer. They sent messages. Nothing. The next day, they received a call from the embassy. Jason had been hospitalized with severe pneumonia after helping refugees on the cold streets of Switzerland. He was under observation, unable to communicate. Scarlett flew out the same day. Ethan stayed behind to settle pending matters, but sent prayers. At the hospital, Scarlett saw her son sleeping pale. She sat beside him, and holding his hand said, "I found you when you were fighting to live. And I'm here again. Nothing will take you from me." Jason woke up hours later, saw his mother, smiled, whispered, "You always come," and went back to sleep. But now in peace. After weeks of recovery, Jason came back home. This time he brought not only international recognition but also a mission to create a global foundation for rejected children. With Ethan's support and Scarlett's heart, the project came to life. Thousands of lives would be touched. And in that home, which had once been just a cold mansion, an eternal legacy was born. Scarlett, watching Jason speak at the foundation's launch, remembered the dumpster, the rain, the soaked coat, and she smiled. Because God had written a story that not even she, with all her faith, could have imagined. Ethan hugged her from behind, whispered, "You are his miracle, and mine," she cried, not from pain, but from gratitude, because in the end, it wasn't about where it all began, but about what love was able to build. The following spring, Ethan did something unexpected. He proposed to Scarlett again. Not as a symbolic ritual, but as a conscious new beginning. Now there were no secrets, no agreements, no disguises. Only love. He built her a garden of white lilies, the flowers Scarlett had dreamed of having in the bouquet on a day that, not long ago, seemed unreachable. Jason was involved in every detail. He said, "I want to walk you down the aisle, Mom." Scarlett laughed. "I'm your mother." But Jason insisted, "You brought me into life. Now I want to bring you into love." On the day of the ceremony, the sky felt like an accomplice. Clear blue with clouds dancing in the wind. The ceremony took place by the lake in Ravenwood, the same place where Scarlett had once searched for a job. But now she arrived not as a cleaning lady, not as a survivor, but as a woman who conquered the impossible with tenderness, faith, and courage. Dressed in elegant simplicity, Scarlett walked among the guests. It was as if time stood still. Each step was memory, miracle, and poetry. Ethan, in a light gray suit, waited for her with tearful eyes. When their eyes met, there was no past anymore. Only the present, alive and whole. Jason united them with a firm voice. Today, you don't just celebrate the love that began by chance, but the love that endured time, fear, and pain. The vows were whispered. Ethan promised never to forget who she was before all of this. Scarlett promised never to let love become routine. When their lips met, there was applause, but also silence, the rare kind that only appears when the soul is at peace. Night fell softly. At the simple, intimate reception, they danced as if they were young again. Jason raised a toast. This story began in the trash, but today it's worth gold. Laughter, tears, and between the lines, something eternal. On their wedding night, Ethan had prepared the room with petals, candles, and a letter. Scarlett read it with trembling hands. "You waited for love. So did I. And today love has found us." It wasn't about bodies. It was about souls. Between kisses and sighs, Scarlett felt something no words could explain. She was exactly where she had always dreamed of being. Ethan cared for her like someone touching a miracle. The moon witnessed everything. And when the two of them fell asleep entwined, the world felt in order for the first time. Months later, Scarlett received a proposal to write her story in a book. She hesitated, but Jason said, "This story needs to reach others." She wrote it all. No embellishments, no hiding the pain. The book became a bestseller. But more than that, it became a tool for healing. Mothers, young people, broken men. All saw themselves in pieces of that story. Ethan funded a film adaptation. Jason directed it. And on the premiere night, Scarlett walked into the theater holding hands with the two men who changed her life. The film was met with a standing ovation. But what truly mattered was what happened next. Thousands of children were adopted. The trash had become a seed. Scarlett aged with grace. Ethan aged by her side. Jason founded schools, cared for orphans, inspired public policies. The world knew his name. But until his last day, he would say, "Everything I am came from the heart of a woman who didn't let me die." Scarlett passed on an autumn morning, with a smile on her lips and her fingers intertwined with Ethan's. When he passed years later, he carried in his pocket Jason's first little outfit and a photo of Scarlett titled, "The Woman Who Taught Me How to Live." On the Carter family's tombstone, there's a phrase, "Here rests a story that began in the trash and ended in heaven." Because sometimes, the end is only the beginning of the eternal. And today, when someone walks through Ravenwood Square, they see a statue of a woman holding a baby wrapped in a coat. On the plaque it reads, "Scarlett Monroe, she chose love. And no one who passes by remains the same. Because where there is love, there is hope. And where there is hope, there is redemption." If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel now. Our next video might change your day or your life. Turn on notifications, share it with someone you love, and help us reach more hearts.